We've brand new Grantchester here tomorrow night at 9, but now it's Inside the Crown, Secrets of the Royals.
The British royal family, one of the most famous dynasties in the world. For more than a century, the lives of the Windsors have enthralled the nation, mesmerized the press, and inspired popular films and dramas. But as the royal family survives a very bumpy year and comes under ever more scrutiny, we ask, what's fact and what's fiction?
There were rumours that not everything was right in the marriage.
He was only on extremely loose terms with monogamy.
That was the moment when the palace absolutely lost grip of the narrative.
In this series, we examine the lives of the royal family, delving deep into the archives to reveal controversial documents concealed for decades.
This is a handwritten note saying, we're going to tap the King's phone.
And meet royal insiders who witnessed history firsthand.
She steps out and we realise this is a horror story.
I'm about 4 feet from the princess. It was the first sign something was wrong.
Tonight, we explore the complex relationship between the royal family and the press.
The royals need the press, but the press need the royals. They sell newspapers.
We love hearing about their sex lives, their money crises, the smashed relationships. We can't get enough of it.
From the news blackouts of the 1950s,
In those days, there was absolutely no question. He undid the back of the camera and handed over the film.
to the feeding frenzy of the 80s and 90s.
William and Harry think the press, particularly press photographers, killed their mother.
The relationship of the royals and the press, it's another royal marriage, and it's a marriage which over the years has needed quite a lot of therapy.
In January, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's announcement that they're quitting their roles as senior members of the royal family sent shockwaves through the monarchy. The news came after what they claim was 3 years of relentless media scrutiny that began when American actress Meghan Markle was first linked with Prince Harry.
And when it was revealed that she was actually dating Prince Harry, she became the most Googled woman on the planet.
As naive as it sounds now, I did not have any understanding of just what it would be like.
I tried to warn you as much as possible.
Meghan became an immediate target for the world's media, who approached friends and family hunting for any information on her past.
Meghan had been very upset by some of the coverage. She then came to London in a friend's private jet and came to Kensington Palace and was kind of in tears about some of the really mean comments.
I was told that Meghan felt from an early stage that the press, the British press, she felt was out to get her.
Harry's told me that he has read stuff in newspapers and he has found it really, really difficult to try and ignore it. But when your girlfriend's in tears crying, what are you going to do? You know, the knight in shining armour arrives to her rescue and says, right, enough is enough.
Harry's response was an unprecedented official statement condemning media treatment of Meghan. It said a line had been crossed and that Meghan had experienced a wave of abuse and harassment with outright sexism and racism from social media trolls.
Very strong language from Harry. You could hear his voice. Angry, very angry. It took everyone by surprise. They didn't tell anyone else they were doing it. They just did it. I know from other very senior aides, eyebrows were really raised about it.
3 years later, in October 2019, Harry issued another statement denouncing the press. He spoke of a ruthless campaign against his wife, saying, "I lost my mother, and now I watch my wife falling victim to the same powerful forces."
Every single time I see a camera, every single time I hear a click, every single time I see a flash, it takes me straight back. What happened to her is incredibly raw every single day, and that's not me being paranoid, that's just me not wanting a repeat of the past.
Palisades have told me this ad infinitum, and it won't be a surprise, that William and Harry think the press, particularly press photographers, killed their mother. When Harry feels his then-girlfriend's under attack, when William felt his then-girlfriend's under attack, when William feels that, you know, his kid's totally off limits, you have to understand that that is where those feelings come from.
How well are you coping with all the press attention? You can tell. Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us out.
Well, it is, naturally.
From the moment she burst upon the royal scene in 1980, the media was obsessed with Princess Diana.
Diana was so popular, putting a photograph of Diana on the front page could double their circulation.
Ken Lennox photographed the royal family for over half a century. In 1982, he took a set of pictures that generated national outrage.
I mean, I regret taking these nowadays. I do. That's the kind of thing it was. I never did anything like that before or since.
Charles and Diana were on a private holiday in the Caribbean, and Ken was dispatched by the Daily Star to land a royal scoop.
I'm about 3/4 to a mile away. Between my knees and my shoulders in water, with a big long lens, a bit like a drain pipe with a bit of glass at either end of it. And to keep it steady, I tied it onto a tree at one end, and much to my surprise, Diana and Charles and Lord Romsey walked down the beach. Diana was in a bikini, and I took some photographs.
Ken's pictures appeared on the front page of the Daily Star. What made them so sensational was not just the intrusion, but that Diana was photographed 4 months pregnant.
I mean, today, you'd think, what's the problem? She had her clothes on, who cares? But here was the woman who would one day be queen, we thought, with her pregnant tummy on display to the world. Really shocking at the time.
But back in the Caribbean, Ken Lennox was oblivious to the impact his pictures were making.
I phoned the office and said, I've got better stuff. I've got Diana and Charles kissing, just their heads bobbing in the water. Diana's throwing a towel over Charles's head, and she's hugging him. Silence. I said, is there something wrong? He said, yes, your editor has just been fired because they've been published. I felt sick.
I think the palace was appalled. I mean, it's rare for the Queen to make a statement, but she called it the blackest day in the history of journalism.
But this was in sharp contrast to the reverential royal media coverage of the past.
During the 1930s, the traditional social hierarchy where the crown was at the apex of the social pyramid was still largely accepted.
In Britain, there wasn't really, at that time, much of a sort of either an appetite for salacious news. It was still a very deferential society.
A few hours ago, I discharged my last duty as King and Emperor.
Even on the brink of the abdication, the British press remained subservient to the royal family, unwilling to report on the scandalous relationship between the King and Wallis Simpson that had been brewing for months.
The abdication was a complete bolt from the blue for most of the British public. This fabulous photograph just sums up the sense of complete shock. The King, grave issues, the King and Mrs. Simpson. People had no idea about this. It does seem extraordinary today that something as big as this could stay secret for as long as it did, for months. In the summer of 1936, you had the King going on holiday on a cruise in the Mediterranean with his lover. It was all over the papers in America, it was all over papers around the world. The British public had no idea.
The conspiracy of silence was orchestrated from the top.
The King has gone along to his friend Lord Beaverbrook, who controlled the Daily Express group, and Beaverbrook has agreed that there should be a gentleman's agreement that the British press should not publish any scandal about the King and Mrs. Simpson, and the press honoured that.
In the National Archives at Kew, royal biographer Robert Hardman has uncovered an astonishing document which reveals the extent of the establishment collusion to conceal the scandal.
This is a telegram from a South African journalist back to his office with one of the great scoops, really, of the 20th century. King has abdicated, leaves England tomorrow, stop. Arrangement may possibly be altered, but that is agreement reached tonight. This is dated the 6th of December. It was only 3 days earlier that the British public had any inkling that their king was about to marry this divorced woman. As a journalist reading this, you can just feel his excitement at having this extraordinary scoop, sending this back to the office. He knows his editor's going to be going, ye gods, clear the front pages, this is dynamite. Except, of course, this story never reaches his editor. What's happened is a post office clerk has spotted this, has passed it to his superior. It's gone right up the chain to the very top of the post office. From there, it's gone to the Home Secretary, and they've decided we're not going to let this go through. We're going to stop this. This news must not get out.
The journalist was then summoned for an official interrogation.
Here, we have the Home Secretary's account of his meeting with the journalists, and really he sort of read the riot act. He says, there was no truth in the statement it contained, and if it had reached South Africa and had been telegraphed back here, the reactions might have been of a most serious character. Here is the government intervening to stop a journalist reporting that the king is abdicating, and then a few days later the king abdicates. This is very heavy-handed censorship.
But that total control of the press couldn't last forever, and by the 1950s, royal embarrassments were becoming harder to conceal.
Suddenly the door of this chalet flew open and out ran the Duke of Edinburgh, followed by a flying tennis racket, a pair of shoes and a rather angry queen.
Over the past century, the royal family's relationship with the press has often been challenging.
Every generation has to come to terms with an entirely new media climate. What the young royals put up with today would have been absolutely inconceivable to their father, let alone the Queen.
At the start of the Queen's reign, the press could still be relied on to toe the royal line. While researching the Queen's 1954 tour of the Commonwealth, royal biographer Robert Hardman uncovered revealing evidence of the royal family's power over the press that was nearly lost to history.
I tracked down a doctoral thesis on that tour, and in there was this extraordinary story. This was the longest royal tour in history. It had been going on for months. The Queen and Prince Philip were given this chalet in the Australian state of Victoria where they could spend the weekend, and they were supposed to, basically it was time out. It was a fairly idyllic hideaway, and they'd forgotten that they were due to be filmed by a Commonwealth broadcasting unit. Suddenly the door of this chalet flew open, so the cameraman thought, well, OK, we're starting, turned on the camera, started filming, at which point out ran the Duke of Edinburgh, followed by a flying tennis racket, a pair of shoes and a rather angry queen. There was a sort of deathly silence. What did we just see? The Queen's press secretary was there in no time. The cameraman knew before he'd even opened his mouth what the question was going to be, and in those days there was absolutely no question. He undid the back of the camera and handed over the film. I mean, these were just very different times.
But 3 years later, one lone voice of dissent managed to break through the press code of silence.
Lord Altrincham owned a magazine called the National and English Review, and he wrote an article which he published in which he criticised the Queen. This is 1957. And he said, the Queen is like a sort of prim schoolgirl.
He said she had the debutante stamp, that she suffered from a woefully inadequate training.
He criticised the courtiers for being stuffy and snobbish and tweedy, that was his word, tweedy. They were tweedy.
And he said that her speaking voice was a pain in the arse.
I want to tell you all how happy I am to be amongst you and how much I look forward to my journey through Australia.
If you do listen to early clips of broadcasts of the Queen at this time, she does sound a little bit like a schoolgirl. It's all very sort of rehearsed.
This article got picked up everywhere. I mean, the reaction was absolutely that the author was a cad.
His criticism of the Queen hit home because she was still in her honeymoon and nobody had really criticised her then.
Lord Altrincham even defended his views on national television, where he was grilled by legendary news anchor Robin Day.
I mean, to judge from your article, you expect the Queen to have qualities of a wit. You would like her to be a better orator. You would like her to be a TV personality, in addition to being a diligent, dutiful, and devoted monarch and a mother.
What I'm suggesting is that in her public speeches and appearances, spontaneity should be the keynote. All I would like to see is the Queen's own character coming through. And I know that if her character is allowed to come through, the effect will be terrific.
But Lord Altrincham's appeal fell on deaf ears.
Lord Altrincham became a sort of figure of hate, and he had awful sort of anonymous letters threatening him.
As he was leaving the television studios after his interview, Lord Altrincham was physically attacked.
An ex-soldier slapped Lord Altrincham flat in the face. He was fined, I think, a pound, something, and the judge sort of said, well, 95% of the population would agree with what you've done. And he himself said that he'd only done what Prince Philip would have done had he been able to do it.
The irony is that in the long term, Lord Altrincham may actually have done the royals a bit of a service. There was an awareness that even the Queen needed to move with the times.
In the wake of Lord Altrincham's criticisms, the royal court cut back on outmoded traditions, including cancelling the debutante's ball. But the palace's changes were glacial compared to what was happening outside in the real world. Deference and restraint were giving way to the freedom and revolution of the swinging 60s. One unpublished picture taken by veteran photographer Ken Lennox in the early 60s shows how the royal family was still out of sync with the public mood.
This is a shot of the Queen arriving by the royal train in Aberdeen, and she's got the corgis, and she's stepping off the train. Now, that's the Queen pregnant. This is a very unusual picture. In those days, you didn't publish photographs of the Queen being pregnant. They were very much sort of private use and so on. I think the public would have loved to have seen the Queen pregnant, but there was a barrier, there was a protocol, and things were done in a certain way. I mean, it was almost Victorian.
The royal family had not had a great time during the 60s. They were being lampooned. They were increasingly seen as remote and aloof.
The monarchy is an oil tanker. It takes a long time to switch course, but very gradually it did switch course.
In 1968, the royal household came up with an idea that would show the British public the royals were just like them.
Prince Philip was rightly aware of the importance of, modernising the monarchy, stopping it from being perceived as being sort of fuddy-duddy and out of date and tweedy and all the things that Lord Altrincham had said the previous decade. The obvious sort of new media of the time was television.
The result was an intimate fly-on-the-wall documentary that caused a sensation when it was broadcast, but has remained under lock and key ever since.
The idea was that people didn't quite appreciate what the Queen did, so this documentary was to show her at work in every aspect of her very dutiful life, and also at play, show her as a domestic woman.
was an incredibly bold thing to do, to be followed by television cameras for an entire year in very, very private moments. It was amazing to see them, like having barbecues, practicing the cello, had an audience of about 25 million, and it made a very, very powerful impression.
But almost as soon as the documentary was broadcast, the royal family had second thoughts.
The Queen, who has copyright over it, put the shutters down, and it will not be shown again unless the royals agree, and they never have agreed.
The royal ban remains so complete, the only footage still widely available is a few grainy black and white clips.
You wish we haven't let the puppies out to us now?
Yes, try. Yes, try. You must. Yes, you must. Mommy, my puppy.
Well, we'll see if she's allowed out in the snow.
On the one hand, the access these cameras were given is still extraordinary. On the other, you've got Prince Philip standing there at the barbecue up in Balmoral, the Queen doing the dishes. It's almost too ordinary.
The problem was that letting daylight in upon magic was a dangerous business. The received wisdom was that this film had ultimately, despite its success, been a mistake from the royals' point of view, that it had somehow vulgarized them, cheapened them, and worse still, it had opened the door to other intrusions into their private life, which might not be so flattering and so carefully choreographed.
And within a few years, one senior royal would become the object of just such unwelcome press scrutiny.
Princess Margaret, she's always in the newspapers, she's always going to outrageous parties.
She had no sense of self-preservation, let alone decorum. She was off her pedestal.
The royal family have always fascinated the press, but in the 1950s, one figure dazzled the media like no other.
Princess Margaret was a gift to the press. She loved to party, she loved to drink. She smoked and had a long cigarette holder. She was glamour personified, and yet she was royal. This was a very intoxicating combination.
In May 1960, Princess Margaret married a man who embodied the spirit of the new decade, Anthony Armstrong Jones.
Princess Margaret first met Tony at my wedding. He was a photographer.
Lady Glenconnor was Princess Margaret's childhood friend, lady-in-waiting and lifelong confidant.
He was the up-and-coming photographer, but he was just a photographer. He wasn't allowed to have lunch with us. I think he did have lunch on his own. My father called him Tony's Snapshot in a rather sort of rude way. But of course, when they became engaged, a lot of us were absolutely amazed, actually. Suddenly she thought, this is the life. And she'd always been very interested and keen on film stars and all that.
Tony Armstrong Jones really was a figure from the swinging 60s. He was in that scene, so he helped to usher Margaret into that world.
As press fascination with them increased, Princess Margaret and her husband became international celebrities.
Can Hollywood, with all its stars and glamour, be impressed? Absolutely. Just like any other town, and especially if it's royalty.
After a party that had lasted till 3 in the morning, the Princess and Lord Snowdon were visiting one of Hollywood's dream factories.
It was, if you like, a kind of typical society setup. They were both well off. They were treated with extraordinary deference, given unearned privileges, and inevitably under these circumstances, both of them behaved badly. Tony Armstrong Jones was only on extremely loose terms with monogamy. He was one of these people who flitted from lady to lady. He was essentially a kind of playboy.
Princess Margaret started having affairs with various people, and the gossip columnists started reporting them, which was, I think, probably the first time that this had happened.
In 1968, a young Australian media mogul arrived to shake up the British newspaper establishment.
Rupert Murdoch's taking over the Sun and the news of the world would prove hugely important for the relationship between press and palace, because Rupert Murdoch was no admirer of the royals.
He understood that in the new media world you could make money by intruding into people's lives, and the royal family were kind of easy pickings. I'm sure the Murdoch press could be very deferential when it suited, but they then turned when the story turned.
The marriage, which had been seen as a happy royal romance, pretty soon deteriorated into a vast, long, drunken squabble.
As her marriage fell apart and press attention became more intrusive, Margaret took refuge on the Caribbean island of Mustique.
Biggest mosquitoes you've ever seen. It wasn't called Mustique for nothing. And it was steaming hot out there.
The island was owned by Lady Glenconner and her husband, Colin Tennant.
We hadn't given them a wedding present. And Colin said to her, would you like something in a little box, or would you like a piece of land? Ooh, I think I'd like a piece of land, she said. But we also gave it to Tony too, because Tony always after that said we'd only given it to Princess Margaret, which is not true. And he called Mustique Mistake, which is rather tiresome of him.
Life out there was a kind of permanent party in which infidelity and drunkenness and bad behaviour was the rule rather than the exception.
In the early 1970s, one young man became a frequent house guest at Princess Margaret's island villa.
Yes.
Roddy Llewellyn was a rather good-looking, rather charming, rather hippie gardener. He became Princess Margaret's toy boy.
He clearly had assets about which we can know little or nothing, but he appealed to her.
Roddy Llewellyn was introduced to Princess Margaret by Lady Glenconner.
I realised very quickly that they'd absolutely fallen for each other. And Roddy came and talked to me one day, and he said, I absolutely think Princess Margaret's the most wonderful person I've ever met, and she's so beautiful and all this sort of thing. So I said, well, don't tell me, Roddy, tell her. Perhaps I shouldn't have, but then I did. But he was so kind, and I think she had a very, very happy time with him.
But the affair was not to stay secret for long. Even on the island of Mustique, Princess Margaret could not escape the press.
In 1976 came the famous photograph. You know, bikini, cigarette, drink, having a wonderful time with a man who was not her husband, who was almost 2 decades younger, and perhaps it was those photographs that really tipped the Snowdon marriage into divorce.
The monarchy was supposed to be the head of our morality. It was supposed to be the presentation of ourselves behaving well. Well, in Princess Margaret's case, it was the presentation of ourselves behaving badly, and the press loved all that.
She had no sense of self-preservation, let alone decorum. She was off her pedestal.
But rather than outrage at press intrusion, the Mustique pictures provoked outrage at Princess Margaret's behaviour.
The 70s were a hideously tough economic decade, and perhaps that's why there began to be more discussion, more hostile discussion, of the extended royal family and the amount it cost and the privileged lifestyle it seemed to be living.
That time, she, along with others, were paid for by the civil list, and therefore the taxpayer was paying for her lifestyle. It was perhaps the beginning of people questioning what the monarchy was all about, and should it be financed by the public, and were they really any better than us?
The greatest threat to the monarchy is not republicanism, it's not extremism, it's not even the media. The greatest threat is irrelevance. The minute you start to be irrelevant, you start to lose interest, and then it's a pretty short road from there to what's the point.
But if the royal family in the 70s was in danger of being seen as remote, in 1980, a new star arrived to make it seem relevant all over again.
Dad, we thought it was going to be an announcement on his 32nd birthday. Have you any comment to make about that?
Maybe done.
During the 80s, there is a complete sort of a revolution, really, in the relationship between the press and the royal family, and we have the cult of celebrity. And then at the centre of all this is Diana, who is amazingly, probably rather unexpectedly photogenic, and who becomes an absolutely central narrative of the 80s and 90s.
To make a mess of a photograph of Diana, you've really got to be bad.
Ken Lennox started photographing Diana from the moment she was first linked with Prince Charles.
Most of the photographers were at least a little bit in love with her, because here was this woman in front of you who looked gorgeous, photographed beautifully, and you got your stuff in the paper, and you get praise from back at the office, and all you had done was photograph one of the most beautiful women in the world.
Until the 1980s, courtiers strictly limited press access to the royal family, but with the arrival of Diana, everything changed.
Buckingham Palace couldn't get enough of this fabulous publicity, and suddenly they were very proactive, and they wanted to push Diana, and it went on like an avalanche. I'd heard that Diana had a new hairstyle. Next day, the palace phoned me up and said, "Ken, the princess is doing a little thing for the Red Cross. Private visit, would you like to go along?" "Oh, yes, please." And I'm watching her, and she's so aware, and she realised after a few minutes I hadn't taken anything. And she looked at me and said, "What?" And I said, 1, 2, 3, so I could see the... And she did 1, 2, 3. Then burst out laughing. She was doing a photo call in front of 300 people at a Red Cross meeting.
And when the royal fairy tale started to go sour, Diana's mastery of the media became her secret weapon.
Diana was extremely canny. She was no fool, nobody's fool at all. She had the media wrapped around her little finger. The shot in front of the Taj Mahal is an absolute classic. There she is in front of this beautiful building, all on her own. Poor, sad Diana.
In 1992, Charles and Diana were on an official tour of India when this single image was seized on by the world's media as evidence of their collapsing marriage.
Now, Charles had been to the Taj Mahal 12 years beforehand and said, "One day I would like to bring my wife here." Well, here they were in 1992 in India, and she was at the Taj Mahal and he was in Bangalore.
We were looking at herbal remedies, Prince Charles and I, that day, at the request of the President. And so there was a job to be done.
Baroness Linda Chalker was Minister for Overseas Development and accompanied Charles and Diana throughout the tour.
If you move around a country, as we did, there are just so many people who want to see you both. You know, you're going to have to split up and go around separately.
Now, in fact, it would be perfectly normal for Charles and Diana to have separate engagements on that day, but she was photographed there, alone, looking wistful, and the picture just said it all.
Charles didn't have a chance to fight her at her own game because, you know, he was a man who was in his 40s, losing his hair. He didn't have the star appeal or the glamour that Diana did. The public saw her as this hugely sympathetic, empathetic, lovely creature who'd been spurned by this curious man.
I was back at base in St James's Palace and Kensington Palace, and I was getting daily phone calls from the princess. Well, I mean, she was unhappy, everybody was unhappy. The lady in waiting was in tears. I mean, it turned into an exercise in damage control.
Patrick Jeffson was Princess Diana's private secretary at the time and managed the fallout from the photograph.
That image of the princess sitting alone in front of the Taj Mahal was damaging in many ways, but I suppose from my perspective it was also quite helpful because I knew that Diana was very unhappy in her marriage. I felt that she was being very unfairly treated. And I had sympathy with her in trying to get that message out to the outside world. The fact that she could sit down in front of the Taj Mahal and not say a word, and yet convey that message very clearly, I thought was a very powerful example of Diana's great ability to convey a message just with a photograph.
But the media that Diana used so brilliantly would ultimately become her downfall.
The use of the press is always a double-edged sword, and so Diana found.
I got a phone call from a photographer. They said they had pictures and they would send them to me, and I agreed to pay close to £1 million.
On the 31st of August 1997, Diana, Princess of Wales, was killed in Paris, her car pursued by paparazzi photographers.
The use of the press is always a double-edged sword, and so Diana found. There can't ever have been another royal, and probably never will be again, for whom the media play such a vital and vitally destructive part in their story.
It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her has blood on his hands today.
Unbelievable. I just couldn't imagine Diana had been killed.
Ken Lennox was the picture editor of the Sun newspaper on the night Diana died and was immediately offered photos of the crash.
I got a phone call from a photographer in Paris who said there'd been a crash and that Dodie was hurt. Diana was okay because he had a picture of her talking to the doctor. So they said they had pictures and they would send them to me. They wanted a lot of money for them. The photographers all come together and decided that if they clubbed what they've got together, sold it exclusively, it was much more valuable than each of them going to different newspapers. So I went into Wapping, I looked at them and I agreed to pay close to £1 million. And I thought she would be as right as rain within a couple of days, and we had this fantastic exclusive. And very quickly the announcement came through that the Princess of Wales had died. I can't believe after 20 years it still affects me.
Suddenly, one of the biggest photographic scoops of the decade had become a toxic liability.
First thing the editor said to me when he came into the office, he came in about 6:45 in the morning, and he said, "Where are the photographs now?" I said, "I've removed them." And he said, "For God's sake, don't let anyone get near these. It's your responsibility."
This is it, this is it.
In the hours following the crash, paparazzi who'd been chasing Diana were arrested.
I blame the Sun newspaper and the ilk.
And across the world, there was an angry backlash against the media and photographers.
You, press that killed her. You're the scum.
Yes.
The pictures bought by Ken Lennox remain locked away to this day.
They actually belong to the photographers who took them, but they do not want to know anything about it. I put them into a blind, which means my solicitor has given them to another solicitor who's not known to me, and he has made arrangements for them to be safeguarded. And the instructions are, if I die, hopefully the Royal Photographic Society will come along and safeguard them, because they're part of a history, and as a photographic history, you can't destroy them.
After Diana's death, the Press Complaints Commission drew up a code of conduct, and it reined in the worst excesses of the media. British newspaper editors agreed not to publish invasive photographs from paparazzi.
Hugely affected by their mother's tragic death, William and Harry were allowed to enjoy their school and university days in relative peace, but soon the palace lost control of the narrative. In his late teens and 20s, Prince Harry's hard partying made him a tabloid target.
The evolution of Prince Harry has been quite extraordinary. It's really not so long ago that he was being photographed going to a party in Nazi uniform, brawls outside nightclubs, that game of strip poker.
But Harry's reputation recovered dramatically when he joined the army and served in Afghanistan, where the press agreed a remarkable pact to respect the young soldier's privacy and security.
If you recall, every Christmas, the Queen and the royal family go to church at Sandringham, and there's always great coverage of who's there. Well, Prince Harry was not there that Christmas. But there was no speculation in the media, where's Prince Harry? Because they all knew.
The mastermind behind the operation was General Lord Dannatt, then head of the British Army.
We had to get round the problem of the media speculating, and speculating so accurately that we could not deploy him. So I thought, let's call together the main television, radio, newspapers, and see whether we can find a way to get him there. And we agreed that, look, if we tell you exactly what he'll be doing, where he'll be, when he's going, give you access to him with a pool of journalists, but you say nothing until he comes back, then we've achieved our aim, he's achieved his aim, and you've achieved your aim, you've got your story. Pretty much all the British media signed up to that.
But just a few weeks before Prince Harry's tour of duty was due to end, his cover was blown by an Australian news outlet.
Harry was absolutely boiling mad. He was pulled out of Afghanistan, and he absolutely hated that.
I do recall on one occasion he sat in a deep armchair in my house and given him a gin and tonic, and he sort of his shoulders slightly slumped and said, "Well, Chubby's, I'm just not like other young men." You know, he knew that he was special and he couldn't be treated in the same way.
The press would prove equally challenging for Harry's brother. For the 4 years William was a student at St Andrews University, he was left in peace. But as soon as he graduated, the media spotlight was back on him. And on his girlfriend, Kate Middleton.
Kate's life was never the same. Her family, her friends, her teachers, anyone who had had anything to do with Kate Middleton suddenly found themselves being called upon, having their doors knocked by reporters and journalists. It was never going to be an easy relationship.
Serene and poised in Malaysia today, but behind the veil, we're told there's fury.
Stay there! Stay there!
A year after they were married, in the middle of a high-profile overseas tour, Kate and William were rocked by the publication of topless pictures taken while they were on a private holiday.
That was paparazzi, a kilometre away, long lens. Pictures never saw the light of day in the UK, but they certainly saw the light of day in the French press.
William was apoplectic. Kate was absolutely devastated. She dealt with it, I think, far better, actually. She put on her best face, she got on with her engagements, but William was absolutely seething.
I think it's not at all surprising that he should have taken such prompt and strong action. He went straight to law and sued the magazine for invasion of privacy.
William's legal action was successful, and the royal couple was awarded £92,000 in damages.
But any sense of success will be tinged with the knowledge that millions of people have seen intensely personal images of them.
It's not that he wanted the money, because the money went to charity, but he's making the point, don't mess with us because we'll mess with you.
And more recently, Prince Harry has followed in his brother's footsteps, taking legal action against British newspapers over alleged phone hacking. The latest move in the often fraught, ongoing relationship between the younger Windsors and the press.
William does the right thing. When babies are born, he stands there, turns his head to the cameras, puts his family on show. But he thinks it should stop there. and he's done everything to make sure it stops there.
The younger royals will expect to be able to step onto the stage, perform their duties, and then step off it again. Whether the press have quite the same expectations is another question.
The idea that we're only going to be interested in the good work they do, and of course it's good work, but not interested in everything else about them is unrealistic.
You're going to be a public figure, Harry, William, for 50, 60 years. So don't worry about tomorrow's headlines. Play the long game.
The Queen's old adage is, we have to be seen to be believed. It's always been a problem with the modern monarchy. How do you square quest for normality with being one of the most famous people on earth?
Next time, we look at how the Queen has handled some of the greatest disasters of her reign.
Anything that could go wrong did go wrong.
The flames seem to be 200 feet high.
My brother and I, we actually heard the bomb go off.
And find out what it takes to be the Queen when your family and the nation are tested to the limit.
Being queen, being monarch, is a very lonely job.
And Inside the Crown continues next Thursday night at 9. Here tomorrow night, after last week's date with Ellie, Will has to ask himself some difficult questions. All New Grantchester continues at 9. Sit tight for the ITV News, coming up next.